Welcome to Bots and Beyond, your weekly dose of all things automation, mixing up end user, vendor and consultant experience to create your go-to podcast for bot-related insights. I am your host, Wayne Butterfield.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Bots and Beyond. As always, another great episode lined up today. Real pleasure to welcome Will Williams at Speechmatics for today's episode. Succeeding in an AI scale-up, and we'll go into a little bit more detail with Will about Speechmatics and about his role there. But Will, great to have you on board.
Thanks very much for having me. Looking forward to this.
Excellent. And as is customary now, it is my way of getting you introduced is to ask who you are, what you do, and why you do it.
Hi, I'm Will Williams. I work and live in Cambridge as a machine learning engineer at a company called Speechmatics. Your why question is interesting. So perhaps don't often get the chance to go into this. I really became fascinated with building machine learning applications when I kind of saw, I guess, the possibility of the types of things that you could build. It's an incredibly fast-moving field, I have to say, which does have big promise for potential future applications. I think lots of the current applications are already pretty exciting, but really it's what could happen in the next 5-10 years that's really exciting for me anyway. I think a lot of people in AI would say this, that we'd love to be able to build a personal research assistant who's more intelligent than us, that will just crank up the leverage about what we can build, what we can do, what we can achieve. And I'm definitely in that camp. So, there's a real kind of, I guess, goal on the horizon that I and probably many AI researchers share, which is they would love to get to that place where, the capabilities and abilities of AI systems are overtaking what humans themselves can do. And I think that's all in mind with having actually systems that can increasingly impact people's lives. And I know that's the case to a certain extent in lots of products, lots of businesses nowadays. But I think this could be that lots of people are seeing, the possibility for a big step change in the impact in people's lives. And I think that's one thing that motivates me and others. Maybe just say a word about ASR, because that's what we do. We do speech recognition. For me, I see that just as a route to that end goal. So other people have described, things like ASR as tool AI. So there are these kind of well-specified tools that are good at one thing only. They're kind of brittle at some times. They have problems around the edges when you provide them with things that maybe they haven't been trained on. And I think there's an understanding in the research field that we do need to go way beyond that. But for me, something like ASR is actually quite exciting to work on because it has all the ingredients that you need for a test bed that lets you attack the bigger questions that kind of the things that are on that horizon. They will let us ask the questions and build systems that potentially might let us get there. So although it kind of like, in some senses, ASR is kind of dumb and boring, actually the tech that sits behind it is quite exciting and has incredible promise. So yeah, that's kind of some of my goals and drivers, I suppose.
Fantastic. And you mentioned a few things there. So obviously, you've got a real passion for where machine learning can add value to the world in the future. And I think that's obviously incredibly, it's an exciting space. And as you say, we really have scratched the surface. And even though there's some amazing accomplishments so far, you just feel that this really is just the start. So yeah, completely concur there. And I'm particularly interested in your actual role. Again, working in an organization where you are tasked with the research and development of a product must be a great one for you, because you are in theory pushing boundaries. And I always, in our previous conversations, I think that's something that you really enjoy. So kind of tell me a bit more about your specific role at Speechmatics.
Yeah, sure. So we have this team called the Applied Machine Learning team. I suppose it's a slightly arbitrary moniker in some senses, but it gives a nod to this idea that we're doing machine learning that does have some kind of direct application. It's some stuff that will get into products. And my role there is to make sure that we're working on the right stuff at the right time, directing our research efforts, making sure the stuff that we work on is actually, viable and promising in some sense. Now, the AML team itself has kind of been given a remit to open new directions for the company. So it's quite separate to our other kind of more traditional ASR speech teams, in that we have our eye to opening up sort of new doors. But maybe there's also there's a more kind of practical role that we have, which is, I guess, to be, in a sense, a servant team to the rest of the company. So we want to develop tools and approaches that are scalable and that can apply to the rest of the company and existing products. And hopefully that means that we kind of have lots of medium-term projects that other people can pick up and use in the stuff that they're doing, and that'll let them build better machine learning products. We do want to up-level existing products. So like at the moment, we've got a big push on, doing stuff that's a little bit more, I guess, closer to the product side of things. But we're also doing some longer term things that we know are going to open doors for potential new products. So we're doing kind of a mix of things, I guess, all under the umbrella of innovation, but with some being a bit more sort of near-term focus and some a bit longer term.
Great. And I think just to kind of pick up on a few of the points there. Firstly, for the audience, when I first started working with the guys at Speechmatics and I kept hearing the term AML, my kind of finance head came on, and AML traditionally to me meant anti-money laundering. I was thinking, what is this anti-money laundering department doing in an ASR company? And it was weeks before I think Will and I spoke, and I understood that it was the applied machine learning team. So it really had me flummoxed for a couple of weeks. So that's just a bit of background there. I also found it quite amusing that even in an AI scale up, you referred to the kind of the ASR product as being the traditional part of a business. And if you think about most traditional businesses, they're probably not AI scale-ups. So the fact that you're kind of pushing boundaries and really looking at what's next, even in an AI company, I think is definitely something that is interesting. Like myself, I'm always kind of on to the next things. I get kind of bored with the traditional. Pushing boundaries is always great, right? You're treading new ground and finding new things and proving out your hypotheses and theories. And I know that there's been some amazing progress made recently, and it's all down to this kind of direction of you and the team in really being given that flexibility to experiment. And I guess that's kind of that whole freedom. I guess that's really important, right? Talk to us a little bit about the kind of freedom that you're given and why that's been important to some of the breakthroughs that you've been able to make.
Sure. So yeah, we want to be really pushing the envelope and making step changes as a team. And I think to make that possible, you do have to have this mix of proven research that you're picking up and using, and particularly machine learning. It's just an absolute fire hose of research in the community. You could fill an incredible number of teams just literally picking up the latest stuff that's been pushed out and implementing it. So that has to be taken seriously. But at the same time, there is room for more speculative work. And if you're the type of team that does want to make step changes, you do have to have that in the mix. For us, it's really useful because it lets us publish, which I think is really important for staying engaged with the academic community. For a team like us, that is absolutely critical. It stops us going down a rabbit hole. It keeps us honest. We have our papers reviewed. We have to make sure that we're thinking clearly. And it gives us kind of the space to look at the wider trends as a team, and which of those would affect the wider company. And I think if you don't kind of have that freedom, you have the blinkers on, it's quite easy to miss those big trends, the big waves that are coming, the waves that maybe are coming in 1 year's time, but particularly the ones that are, I'd say, 2.5 to 3 years out. I think beyond that in machine learning, you can't really predict. But like over that sort of 2.5 year horizon, you can see some of these big waves coming, and having the freedom to experiment, engage with the academic community, do lots of reading, I think it is incredibly important to have like a good hold on those issues. One thing that I guess I would say is that different companies will have a different risk profile on this question, and it'll be completely sort of product dependent. I think some products will benefit hugely from having this kind of mix, and others probably less so. But I think one of the things that makes this work for us is that we're the type of team that does want to make a big leap forward, and so for us it is pretty critical.
Thinking about Speechmatics specifically and kind of the role of ASR, so for automated speech recognition, for those not aware of the acronym, kind of what are the complexities in ASR? Like, what are the types of things that you're looking to overcome? I guess to maintain your position as best in class.
Yeah, so I mean, the stuff that we're looking to overcome is the stuff that makes ASR very tough in the first place. Machine learning is all about generalization, and the generalization problem in ASR is particularly difficult. So people can sound very, very, very different. They can speak at different speeds. They can say words completely differently, but our task is still to output the same words that have been spoken, no matter what kind of variability is there. So it's an incredibly difficult nonlinear mapping that we need really big models to be able to handle this, to be able to model it. So that's tough in the first place. But then at the same time, we have to be able to deploy this with a sensible runtime. So we can't just use, I don't know, the biggest models that we might think are good. We have to also think about how we actually shrink this thing down and get it running fast at runtime. So that's an interesting balance. That's a big sort of that's a complexity. Another one, I think, that we're seeing now, I mean, particularly if you look at the output of our system and you inspect the errors, there's a lot of stuff there which humans would just not accept. So, I can even read some of our transcripts that we output, and I know that there are some mistakes in there that could be fixed, even without having heard the audio. Just common sense things about the world. You know how the world works. The types of things that people say. These ASR systems don't really work like that. They're more kind of bottom up, and I think there's a big piece of complexity in understanding how we sort of impart this common sense knowledge into these models. So it's kind of a bottom down kind of like, no, you can't say that kind of thing. It doesn't make sense. And there is a component of the system, these language models that does that to a certain extent, but they're also kind of dumb. They still don't really understand the real world. So I think there's a massive piece there where we need to put our models on a trajectory where they are increasingly being able to leverage common sense understanding of the world. That means that there's a whole class of errors that these systems make that just disappear. And I think if you speak to any devices and hear some of the mistakes that they make when they're trying to understand what you say, you might understand what I'm getting at here.
Absolutely. Well, we have about 3 or 4 Alexas in our house, as an example, and we have a 3-year-old asking Alexa, a 6-year-old asking Alexa, and me asking Alexa various different questions. And I must admit, I have I don't even know why I do it, but I ask Alexa in different accents the same thing, ask to do things very, very, I know it's very, very childish, but it is interesting how, speech is so difficult. You can see and you can hear it, right? If you think about text analytics, and I've recently wrote an article for an organization I'm working with around conversation mining. Text is so much easier than speech, because generally words are written in a way, and yes, there is the occasional utterance that isn't quite how you might say something. There is local dialects to a degree, but it is, quite minimal in comparison, as you say, to the way people speak, the speed that people speak, the tone, the pitch. There's just so much variance there, isn't there? So you can really understand why, even before you get into an accuracy perspective, you can really understand why it is such a complex thing to do. And I was kind of, when you were speaking, then I was thinking about meaning and how difficult that is, and even something like GPT-3, which can, to a degree, create a written understanding of something, but actually doesn't really understand the meaning of what it has written. And I guess ASR's similar in that it's transcribing what you have said without actually understanding what it means. And I guess that's a really difficult nut to crack. How do we, start to create an ML that understands the meaning of what it is doing? And now, that really is, I guess, the stuff that's a little further out there. I mean, do you kind of have a view on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the type of thing that I do enjoy speculating about. Going back to what you were just saying, it was very interesting. There's a lot of ink being spilt over this issue of, what do these things understand? What is meaning? For me, if a system can act in a way that's, I guess, perceived to be intelligent, it can generalize in an incredibly powerful way. The kind of meaning question kind of dissolves a bit. In recent years, we've seen incredible advances, things that were surprising. I think GPT-3 was surprising in terms of what it could do. I still have some reservations about it, but it is learning incredible functions that are incredibly useful. So I think it's around the 5 to 10 year horizon that we might see something that's a bit of a step change here. But beyond that, it's unclear to what extent we'll have agents that we can interact with on a level that's on par with us. I said I'd like to speculate, but it's actually a field where it is incredibly hard to speculate. Yeah, time and time again, people have said that human level AI is 10 years away, and that's been going on for a very long time. There's lots of jokes around this sort of thing. So I think it's easy to get it wrong, but there's great cause for, I think, excitement at the moment. Just with the sheer capability of some of the models that people like OpenAI have been shipping at the moment, incredible demos, things that we didn't think were possible by cranking up the number of parameters in our models. It turns out, yeah, some of this stuff really is possible. And it's clearly learning something. It's learning some aspects of meaning, maybe not all the things that we'd like, but it's ticking more and more of the boxes as we go along, and the dissenters are getting fewer and fewer. So it is interesting.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, I think it's an area and a topic that we could talk about forever. But I think I've got probably one more question, and I guess it kind of comes back to to those that are listening, and this kind of balance between making progress, innovating, but then also kind of justifying your existence. It's often difficult to apply kind of a business value immediately to kind of R&D, and I don't know whether there's anything that you guys do. I mean, how do you kind of justify your roles within the business? What's the cadence you have with the wider organization, so that there's not this kind of outward view that AML are doing loads of stuff, but when's it really going to start to deliver? Do you kind of have a view on that, and what is it that you guys do to kind of bring the rest of the Speechmatics business on the journey that you're on?
One of the things I think is that in our minds we kind of look 1 year ahead. So at the beginning of each year we'll have a good idea of the types of things that we want to tick off during that year, or big research direction pushes that we might want to have. And we will kind of check back with the business maybe on a quarterly basis to see how we're doing against those things. And there'll be some kind of, I guess, meandering there where we decide to pivot a bit, and that's completely natural. But I think that kind of overall structure, surprisingly, I guess, gives you the freedom to find research directions that do work during that year. With that structure kind of in place, I guess the other thing that I'd say is there's a kind of a bigger feeling within the team that we need to explore more. and maybe, I don't know, do a bit more research, read more papers, be in a bit of more of a mindset where we're exploring. And then that might result in a paper. It might result in, I don't know, some work on a project that produces something that's maybe a little bit more risky. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. And I think after that, there's it kind of collapses back into a more exploit phase where, like, okay, maybe we've learned these things. We've seen that this is promising, and we're just like, okay, we need to just get all this stuff together and start like motoring on a more kind of exploit phase. And maybe there'll be kind of like one explore phase during a year and one exploit. So we kind of seem to oscillate between these two extremes, and that seems to work well for us. It seems to fit well with the business. So it keeps us doing the kind of, gives us the freedom to experiment, which we were saying before is important, but it also makes sure that we keep delivering business value and that we don't lose our way. So we kind of get the steer from the academic community, we get the steer from the business, and we kind of oscillate between the two, that just seems to work well for us. It ends up giving us like a good mix of kind of high risk, high reward items and lower risk, lower reward items, which I think we probably need to have as a team. And it gives us, I suppose, a variety of tools and approaches that are useful not just for us in our ongoing efforts, but the rest of the company as well. So there's one other point I want to add to that, which is for machine learning, in order to build really, really good products, you do need an incredible amount of energy, grit, and enthusiasm. So it's not all kind of, I suppose, like nice, pretty maths lectures. When you want to build these systems and get them ready to work, you have to get really into the weeds, and that takes quite a lot of energy and momentum. And I think having this time where we can be a bit more exploratory gives us the inspiration and energy for the more knuckling down kind of phase. Or at least this is how I see it anyway. And that really does seem to work well.
You know, I could chat to you for hours, Will. I think it's great to get this kind of insight, from somebody who really is kind of in the middle of it, in the thick of it, in an organization that's very much in the cutting edge. You're on the cutting edge of the cutting edge organization. And so it's great, I think, for myself and the rest of the listeners to really hear firsthand kind of some of the trials and tribulations of working in R&D in an AI scale up. So thanks ever so much, Will. I really do appreciate this. I'm sure the audience will too. So thank you for your time.
Very welcome. Thanks for having me on. It was really good fun.
Brilliant. And for everybody else, thank you for joining. And we'll see you next week.